constitutional democracies aren't built around personalities, they're built around principles. Now, the president's lawyers argues this is about legal process, that the Section 89 panel applied the wrong test. Courts exist to settle exactly that kind of dispute. There's nothing unusual there. What is unusual, though, is asking one institution of democracy to stop another one from doing its job. Leadership isn't only about winning legal arguments, it's about setting constitutional examples. This is the same president who spoke passionately about accountability, who championed the Zondo Commission, who told South Africans that nobody is above the law. And no, Papa, wetsala. So naturally, people ask, why should Parliament be stopped from asking questions? Again, this isn't about guilt. Parliament asking questions doesn't make someone guilty. It makes Parliament functional. That's what it's called democracy. Imagine every mayor, every premier, every minister running to court each time an oversight committee wanted answers. Government would grind to a halt. Accountability would become optional. Democracy would slowly become negotiable. The presidency is bigger than any one person, because long after Cyril Ramaphosa leaves that office, another president will arrive, and another, and another. The president we set today belongs to them tomorrow. That's why this matters, not personalities. Principles. Strong democracies don't fear oversight. They should embrace it. Welcome to Be Frank with MacG. No filters, no spin, just honest conversations about the hard truths facing South Africa. Let's begin with a photograph. Not a corruption scandal, not a leaked recording, snape. A photograph. Because sometimes one picture exposes a failure of leadership better than 1,000 leaked emails, and with none of the paperwork. And this week, the Financial Mail and Currency News unveiled their newly merged newsroom. It should have been a celebration. Pop champagne, pop mabodlela. Instead, it became a national controversy. South Africans looked at one promotional photograph and asked a simple question. Waar is die darkies? Hey? Where are the black journalists? Within hours, social media erupted. Financial Mail apologized. They admitted they'd got it wrong. They promised to do better. Fine, no problem. Askis, I'm sorry. But the apology isn't the interesting part of the story. The photograph is. Because here's what I just simply cannot understand. This is 2026, not 1986. South Africa has been a constitutional democracy for more than 30 years. Transformation, representation, employment equity, these are not new conversations. They've been part of the South African dialect for a very long time. So how did this happen? Not by accident. Someone organized the shoot, someone chose the people, someone looked through the camera, someone edited the picture, someone said, come closer. Hey? No, you move that side. You are tall. Go to the back. And someone approved it. Someone in senior management looked at that image and said, yes, publish it. Beautiful. Well done. And this should tell you everything you need to know about how many black colleagues were in that final sign-off meeting. Did nobody stop for 5 seconds and ask, do you think maybe South Africans might notice this? Because this wasn't a teenager posting something silly on Instagram. This wasn't an intern's mistake. These are experienced executives running one of South Africa's most respected financial publications. Guys, leadership means seeing around corners, seeing the problem before everyone else does. If ordinary South Africans spotted it within seconds, how did the people paid to lead the institution miss it completely? That's the question. Because this isn't simply about race. It's about judgment, about awareness, about whether the people running our institutions actually understand the country that they operate in. And here's the irony, right? Financial Mail has spent decades asking hard questions. Questions of politicians, business leaders, CEO, boards, demanding accountability, transformation. And quite rightly, it is their job. But this week, South Africans asked the same thing of them. Turns out the tables turn faster than a print deadline. Because accountability doesn't become optional the moment the spotlight turns around. If you demand transparency from everyone else, you better be ready to explain your own decisions. That's how credibility works. Look, the apology matters. The explanation matters more. Because unless we understand how a room full of experienced people convinced themselves this was fine, then nothing has actually been learned. An apology fixes the headline. It doesn't fix the thinking that created it. Do better, guys. Just do better. And so last week, South Africa became fascinated by a medical certificate. You remember the word? Madlanga lightus, fabricators, can't go to Ekas. That one. It changes every week. Leave me alone. Not because someone was sick, but because Justice Madlanga described it as a useless medical certificate. Somewhere, a doctor is having a very awkward week. The woman at the center of it all, Advocate Andrea Johnson, head of the investigating directorate against corruption. The person whose job is investigating corruption found herself investigated instead. Camera lens was 10 like this. This week, she finally appeared before the commission. For 3 days, the country watched. She denied wrongdoing. She defended her conduct. She corrected parts of her earlier evidence. She answered difficult questions.
I don't know her qualifications, but the fact that you point me to that means they must be there.
Stop there, Advocate Johnson. You don't know her qualifications.
I know she has, it was called megatronics.
Do you know what her qualifications are?
Not all her qualifications, no.
So why do you make a statement under oath to say she's not suitable for this position if you don't know what her qualifications are? Why do you make a statement to this commission to say the big picture will show that she doesn't have qualifications? Can I ask that they be flighted so that we can look at them? Can we go to 270 on the same file? Are you there?
Yes.
So that's a degree in engineering, industrial engineering. Do you see that?
I see that.
So already she meets the qualification. Now go to the next page on 271.
I see that.
Are you there?
I am there.
Now that's a diploma in mecha, not mega, mechatronics. Now, what is the relevance of that? That is the core description of this role. If you go back to the advert on 176, you will see that the core functions, what crime intelligence was looking for, is exactly this qualification. Because the description of the role tells you that they want somebody who's qualified in mechanics and electronics and all of those. Do you see those?
I see that,
Yes.
Commissioner.
Now, from 270, I don't want to show her matric certificate.
No,
it's not
yes.
fair to Ms. Mokwele. But it's on 272. Please don't flight it. It's quite clear that this is somebody who is very bright. I must say this to you. Before I saw these files, the picture painted in my head was that crime intelligence appointed a receptionist from BMW.
At times, she leaned on her constitutional rights, which produced one of the strangest images of the week. The country's most senior anti-corruption prosecutor invoking the same protections normally claimed by people under investigation. That doesn't make her guilty. Rights belong to everyone. That's how democracy works. But it's extraordinary, isn't it? Then, Today, another remarkable moment. Advocate Johnson apologized to Brigadier Dineo Mokwele, the crime intelligence brigadier who used to fix BMWs for a living, and now finds herself untangling something with far more moving parts.
It's a serious abuse of power by IDEC to target a civilian. And that's what I have a problem with. My sympathy for her is a bit different to the generals, because if they did what they did, the law must take its course. But we must draw the line where organs that are supposed to protect the public and, work for the benefit of the public are used in this manner to unfairly target civilians. That is just not right.
I understand, hence I made the apology earlier.
Yeah.
It does not detract from the fact that there is a case for which they have now made representations. Mokwele as well.
As you said, it's not just the representations, there's also the review process.
Exactly,
that you referred to.
Yes, and so in the end, fairness and justice must prevail. So if we have made the wrong decision, then that decision will be corrected. And I'm saying that in terms of the appointment, I'm not retracting anything that I said at all.
I think my difficulty with you is if you should not think that the fact that there's a review process, there's a representation process, and therefore what you sought to do, which is to prosecute. If those decisions are reversed, then all is good. It cannot be that. Our inquiry is really about why did you make these decisions? It's not about the merits of your case. And
again, an apology doesn't prove guilt, and it doesn't also end the matter. But apologies carry weight, especially inside a judicial commission, because every correction, every clarification, every apology raises the same uncomfortable question. How much confidence should South Africans have in investigations that shaped major national decisions if the people running them are still correcting their own evidence? Justice Madlanga has reminded witnesses again and again, the commission exists to establish the truth, not to protect reputations, not to settle political scores. The truth. And this brings us back to where we started tonight. We speak about trust. The media asks for it, the PIC depends on it, the justice system cannot survive without it. And once trust starts to disappear, every institution begins looking over its shoulder, not because the law has changed, but because public confidence has. Let's look at the man who lost a year and then finally got it back. Politics aside for a moment. Imagine waking up tomorrow and being told you can no longer do your job. Not because you've been found guilty, not because you've been convicted, because serious allegations have been made against you. You wait 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a whole entire year. Your reputation is shredded. Your career is frozen. The newspapers move on, but your family doesn't. This is the story of Andrea Chauke. This week, President Cyril Ramaphosa informed the South Gauteng Director of Public Prosecutions that the Nkabinde Commission found him fit and proper to hold office. The allegations did not survive the evidence. Now, whether you like Andrea Chauke or not, that's irrelevant. The story isn't really about him. This is about justice. Because justice cuts both ways. It punishes the guilty. It also protects the innocent. If we celebrate accountability, we must also celebrate exoneration. Otherwise, accountability just becomes another word for accusation. But this story also leaves an uncomfortable question hanging in the air. Who accounts for the accusation? We've seen the story play itself many times over. Who accounts for the accusation? A year of uncertainty, a year of suspension, a year where one of the country's most senior prosecutors wasn't prosecuting anyone. Paid for the whole time by us, the South African taxpayer. If the inquiry concludes there was no basis to remove him, who answers for the damage? Because institutions don't only lose credibility when guilty people escape justice, they also lose it when innocent people spend years trying to recover their names. So maybe that's the lesson. Justice delayed doesn't only hurt victims. Sometimes it hurts the very people who are eventually proven innocent. We bring the story back. The president went to court to avoid parliament. So let's chat here about something bigger than Cyril Ramaphosa. Let's look at the presidency itself. This week, President Cyril Ramaphosa asked the Western Cape High Court to stop Parliament's Section 89 impeachment inquiry into the Phala Phala matter. Strangely enough, the judgment isn't the biggest story, but the application is. Section 89 exists for one reason, to make sure even the president can be held accountable by Parliament. Notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say only unpopular presidents. It doesn't say only presidents from certain parties. It says the president. Because constitutional democracies aren't built around personalities. They're built around principles. Now, the president's lawyers argues this is about legal process, that the Section 89 panel applied the wrong test. Courts exist to settle exactly that kind of dispute. There's nothing unusual there. What is unusual, though, is asking one institution of democracy to stop another one from doing its job. Leadership isn't only about winning legal arguments, it's about setting constitutional examples. This is the same president who spoke passionately about accountability, who championed the Zondo Commission, who told South Africans that nobody is above the law. And no? Papa, wetsala. So naturally people ask, why should Parliament be stopped from asking questions? Again, this isn't about guilt. Parliament asking questions doesn't make someone guilty. It makes Parliament functional. That's what it's called democracy. Imagine every mayor, every premier, every minister running to court each time an oversight committee wanted answers. Government would grind to a halt. Accountability would become optional. Democracy would slowly become negotiable. The presidency is bigger than any one person, because long after Cyril Ramaphosa leaves that office, another president will arrive, and another, and another. The president we set today belongs to them tomorrow. That's why this matters. Not personalities, principles. Strong democracies don't fear oversight. They should embrace it. So tonight I'm going to leave you with a number. Not 24.7 billion, not 6.3 trillion, 1 billion rand. That's what South Africa spends every single day just to service its debt. Not build a school, not to fix a hospital, not to hire another police officers, and not to repair a leaking pipe. 1 billion rand a day simply to pay interest on money we've already borrowed. The most expensive subscription service in the country, and nobody remembers signing up. This week, government announced it will borrow another 24.7 billion rand, this time from the World Bank, to support reforms in electricity, freight rail, ports and water infrastructure.
South Africa has secured a $1.5 billion World Bank loan to support reforms aimed at modernizing its infrastructure and creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. It will help the country confront chronic challenges in electricity supply, freight transport and water and sanitation services that have long constrained economic growth. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development loan is the fourth in a series of standalone development policy loans to South Africa since 2022. It comes as the government intensifies efforts to remove key infrastructure bottlenecks, improve service delivery and stimulate investment across critical sectors of the economy. The National Treasury says the loan offers a favourable interest rate and flexible repayment terms, contributing to minimising an increase in debt servicing costs.
The argument is simple. Fix infrastructure, grow the economy, create jobs. If that's exactly what happens, every South African should welcome it. But here is the uncomfortable question. How do we become a country that has to borrow money to fix infrastructure that we already paid for? We've paid for Eskom, we've paid for Transnet, we've paid for municipality, water infrastructure, roads, rail. Where did all that money go? Borrowing isn't automatically bad. Every successful country borrows. Businesses borrow, families borrow, you borrow. The issue isn't whether you borrow, it's why and whether you can afford it and how the hell are you going to pay it back. Because imagine walking into a bank, already struggling to repay your existing loans and asking for another one. The bank would ask you one question: what has changed? Can you actually repay this? Perhaps government should be asking itself the same thing. South Africa's gross government debt is expected to reach 6.3 trillion this financial year, around 77% of everything the country produces in a year. And remember, we're borrowing that money to the World Bank. And you know what the World Bank does. You know what the World Bank does. They're going to own us. And that is not a good sight. So watch the space. We'll be back around that issue. Because every rand that is spent servicing debt is a rand that can't be spent anywhere else. Less for classrooms, less for clinics, less for policing, less for housing, less for the very people government says it exists to serve. To be fair, the World Bank says this isn't simply a loan. It's support for reforms that will modernize infrastructure, remove bottlenecks, and unlock growth and jobs. We should all hope that's true. South Africa desperately needs growth, jobs, and infrastructure that actually works. But hope cannot become economic policy. Loans don't solve problems. Good governance does. Money doesn't build countries. Leadership does. The real question isn't whether South Africa should borrow. It's whether South Africa has shown it can spend borrowed money better than it spent the money it already had. Because if we keep borrowing without fixing the reasons we keep borrowing, debt stops being a solution, it becomes a lifestyle. So, in everything that we've spoken about, let's step back. Because individually, these stories seem unrelated. A newspaper photograph, a pension fund managing trillions, an anti-corruption prosecutor answering hard questions, a senior prosecutor cleared after a year under suspicion, and another 24.7 billion rand loan. Different headlines, different institutions, exactly the same questions. What have we come to accept as normal? This week, Financial Mail apologized for a photograph that should have never left the boardroom. The Madlanga Commission reminded us that those entrusted with fighting corruption must themselves be prepared to answer for their conduct. Andrea Chauke reminded us that justice doesn't only punish the guilty, it must also restore the innocent. Government reminded us that while South Africa already spends around 1 billion rand every day servicing debt, we're borrowing another 24.7 billion rand because we still haven't fixed the systems that got us here. But perhaps the most important story this week wasn't any of those. Statistics South Africa released figures showing something remarkable. There are fewer South Africans who now describe themselves as poor than a decade ago. And yet nearly 38% of our people still live below the lower bound poverty line. And how is that possible? The answer may be uncomfortable. Perhaps people haven't become less poor. Perhaps they've simply become used to less. Less opportunity, less reliable government, less service delivery, less hope. Maybe our expectations have shifted more than our circumstances. Maybe we've stopped expecting the country to work the way it should. And if that's true, it's more dangerous than unemployment, more dangerous than debt, and it's more dangerous than corruption. Because when citizens lower their expectations, leaders lower their standards. Countries don't decline because people demand too much. They decline when people stop demanding enough. When potholes become normal, when load shedding becomes normal, when taps run dry, become normal, when billion rand corruption becomes normal, when borrowing money to pay for what taxes should have built becomes normal. We pride ourselves and say that South Africans are among the most resilient people on earth. But resilience can become a trap Because sometimes we celebrate our ability to survive instead of demanding the conditions to thrive. Maybe that's what this week really told us. Our greatest national crisis isn't only debt or corruption or failing institutions. It's the quiet collapse of expectations. The day South Africans begin believing that this is simply the best we can do is the day we stop building the country we deserve. So, let me leave you with one final thought. Democracy doesn't only depend on elections. It depends on citizens who refuse to normalize failure, who refuse to applaud mediocrity, who refuse to confuse survival with don't get used to failure. Don't get used to excuses. Don't get used to decline. Because the moment a nation accepts less than it deserves, it will always receive exactly that. I'm Moleli. This has been Be Frank with MacG. Good night.